So if I may go on to round two, which is really the challenge of the neighbors. Why don't we begin with Air Marshal Barbosa, please?
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to give my views. Although I presume I'm one of the recently retired person out here compared to many others. But let's start from saying, what is the force structure dependent upon? When we think about a force structure, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, it is on the perceived threat based on, of course, inputs from the government from time to time. Because like he said very rightly, who makes out the op directive? It's the three services who put it up to the RM, and the RM signs it. Practically 90% of it is that. Right. Now, based on a two-front war, we are still stuck to that two-front war, Pak and China. Then why are we building our capabilities to the extent of having a strategic reach? The Navy's got it. The Air Force has bid for it. We've got the C-17s. And whatever you say, we've got air-to-air refueling. It gives us capability go on to the other side of Eastern Africa. So why are we first fixed on this Pak-centric, China-centric? Who gets more weightage is different. Right. The figures were covered. I walked in slightly late, but I think 19 squadrons were quoted for Pakistan, and they were double, China was double ours, and redundancies, obsolescence, etc. was covered. But remember, Pakistan is moving very rapidly into the high-tech zone. We, unfortunately, have not moved. I'm talking of force multipliers also here. We haven't moved. As far as China goes, very little is known about their high technology, but I am quite sure that they are not as good as one likes to believe they are. Again, unfortunately, we have never discussed in any forum seriously. We just say, yeah, we don't know what will happen. Is a nuclear factor which has come into play. We have armed our aircraft, we have armed our ships, we are arming of course, the land-based missile systems are there. But in this whole context of force structuring, unless we factor in the nuclear factor, I'm sorry, you will not be able to come to some kind of understanding. How will it impact? Yes, you will all say nuclear factor is a deterrent factor, no doubt. Okay, then do we require to have so many systems, a triad, to have as a deterrent system?
But sir, you've actually run an exercise at one time against the Chinese, a model exercise on this, didn't you? Can you enlighten us in terms of what you're saying, in terms of what that taught you? So we'll get some practical wisdom here.
I don't think I'll be able to finish the points here then, if I had to go back to that. And yeah, let's try it later. Now, the nuclear factor we have to think about. Force structure, like it was very rightly covered budget. And some estimates which were given here, 2 to 3% of GDP, etc. I'm sorry, that's not correct. At the end of the day, our annual budget works out to just about 1.4 to 1.8% of the GDP. I remember once when the finance minister, Mr. Chidambaram, was there, the Prime Minister got up and said that if this is our GDP growth, etc., we will increase it beyond 3%. Chidambaram walked up later and said, you will not get more than 2.5%. Immediately after he said that. So we have to keep that in mind with the GDP. So with the new government, they can't have a magic basket where they can keep pulling out money. Where are they going to generate when they have got committed liabilities which they have made in the manifesto plus the committed liability of service? Where are we going to get the money from? Only money can get us the structure that we want. And I don't agree with Ajay here at all, that we have to do a rethink. We are already a decade and a half behind time. If we have to rethink our whole kahani, I'm sorry, we'll go another decade and a half behind time. We require things immediately for all three services. I'm not going to harp on that too much.
I'm going to ask Jimmy Bhatia.
But right now, when we are talking about the two-front scenario, first of all, I feel that this particular coinage was made by the Indian Army, really, this two-front situation. Now that we do talk about it, we need to talk about the capabilities of our adversaries and how to match that. Now we are talking about Pakistan and China, obviously, when we are talking about a two-front war. And now that we are talking about air power, we have to compare ourselves with them. If you look at that, even today, two together have about 100 combat squadrons, so they'll have that kind of capability. And India, or Indian Air Force right now, is struggling with 34, maybe trying to build up to 42. I am not suggesting here that we should be talking brick to brick or stone to stone, that kind of capability. But we need to build the kind of capability which will be able to cause certain amount of deterrence on this combined capability that we are talking about. If we have come to the conclusion that 42 or 45 squadrons will give us that kind of capability to be able to keep at bay our adversaries in the air power sector, so be it. There are certain people, for example, I personally feel that if you're really talking about this kind of a thing, that we should think in terms of ultimately going up to somewhere close to 50 squadrons of, combat squadrons, if we want to do that.
This is based on what? Is this sheer conjecture or
I am talking about matching the capabilities, and if we do fight a two-front war, what kind of force requirements we will have on both sides to be able to fight the war. We will need that kind of a thing. We need to build that kind of capability. And as Air Chief Marshal Tyagi brought out, basically we want to create that kind of capability to be able to deter the adversary into getting into hot war situation.
Brigadier Gurmeet, what do you think of what Air Marshal Jimmy just said?
Let me begin with a landlubber's worm's eye view, and I hope I don't manage to annoy any of my Air Force colleagues. First and foremost, the probability of state-on-state conflict is low. I'll not qualify it, I'll leave it at that. In our case, if a conventional conflict does break out, in my view, there's an 80 to 90% probability that it will break out in the mountains. That's where the disputes are. Territorial and boundary dispute with China and a territorial dispute with Pakistan, though we like to call it an issue and not a dispute. Also Pakistan's proxy war. Having broken out in the mountains, in my view, there is a 60 to 70% probability that the conflict will remain confined to the mountains. With China, in any case, that's where the dispute is. I mean, I'm not talking of the maritime domain for the next 10 to 15 years. We are not unlikely to see a dispute in the maritime domain of over the next 10 to 15 years, which we dominate in any case for the time being. And with Pakistan, because of the so-called low nuclear threshold, both sides, I'm sure, will make maximum endeavors to ensure that the conflict remains confined to Jammu and Kashmir. There would be a conflict in the plains, but it would be extremely limited. We will not go in deep with strike corps and so on. Having said that, in order to achieve the required military aims in a future conventional conflict with either China or Pakistan, since I'm saying it's going to be confined to the mountains, and you cannot maneuver in the mountains, maneuver and firepower being two sides of the same coin, we will need massive asymmetries of firepower. This firepower, in order to achieve the military aims, whatever the political aim may be, the military aim will be to destroy maximum of the adversary's forces and to some extent capture some territory as a bargaining counter. Now this firepower will come from the ground, artillery, rockets, it will come from missiles, surface to surface, it will come from helicopter gunships to a very limited extent, but the bulk of it will come from the Indian Air Force. Therefore, my contention that for the next conflict which will be fought in the mountains, we need massive firepower to be delivered from the air. Is the Indian Air Force thinking on those lines? Is there sufficient quantities of air-to-ground ammunition available? Also precision-guided munitions. We will need a large quantity of PGMs. Again, I want labor on it. From the first Gulf War, where 10 to 12% were PGMs, to the Libyan conflict, where 90% of the armed weapons used were PGMs, the world has gone a long way. Do we even have 10% of PGMs in our inventory? I doubt it very much. Probably classified.
Thank you, Brigadier. I will let Nitin answer that question.
Half a minute,
Nitin,
please. Chair,
okay,
half a minute.
Half a minute.
If you
sure.
permit. on the issue of the two-front war, I would say that if we fight a war with China, the conventional wisdom is Pakistan will step in. But if we fight a war with Pakistan alone, China may or may not step in. It will probably limit its presence to some force posturing. Last point, sir. Intervention. In my view, again, in the next 10 to 15 years, India will intervene in its national interest, in its area of strategic interest, extending from the Gulf, from the Horn of Africa in the west to the eastern mouth of the Malacca Straits. Some people want to extend it to the South China Sea. Well, maybe 10 to 15 years hence, but not now. So we will intervene either unilaterally or as part of a coalition of the willing, preferably under a UN flag. Therefore, the Air Force and of course the Navy should be able to support and lead, in fact, such an intervention. Thank you.
Nitin?
I was listening to the previous couple of speakers, and since this session is about Air Force power and two-front war, I think before we get into what the Air Force structure should be, I think we should first try and get the Air Force's balance of air power redressed. The way the obsolescence is dominating now, if you see the numbers of squadrons that have been given, mixed squadrons are 11, Sukhois are 10. And if you look at the mix, I think first priority in the next 5 years should be to redress that balance, or at least reset that balance, so that you get a mix which is appropriate for all the wars that you're likely to fight, like Gurmeet said, in the mountains and some of them in the plains. So therefore, that should be the first priority. Then of course, ammunition that is spoken about, precision guided, and infrastructure. I mean, if you're going to fight in the mountains, as we are most likely to in the northern frontiers, I think our infrastructure in Arunachal and in Ladakh remains woefully inadequate for various reasons, for environmental clearances being blocked, for land acquisition not being given, or attention not being paid in Arunachal, both in terms of Air Force infrastructure as well as roads for the army. So therefore, that should be, the priorities have to be listed out. Instead of talking about a huge range of options for a two-front war or a strategic airlift, or even looking at an expeditionary force, all that must come much later, is my layman's view. I think first priority should be to improve the squadron strength, and a squadron strength of aircraft which are relevant, not MiGs, which are based in the northeast and which probably will not suffice. We've based 2 squadrons or maybe 4 squadrons in the northeast. Is that sufficient? Do we need to have Sukhoi squadrons, or maybe the MMRCA coming in to be in Ladakh? All that needs to be done. So that's my point of view, rather than setting over-ambitious targets of 45 squadrons, 50 squadrons. Do we have that kind of money at the moment? I don't think so for the next 10 years. So
Okay,
think of that.
Thanks a lot, Nitin. Okay, now we open house, sir. You can go first, sir.
Gurmeet says quite rightly that the areas of conflict, if at all, are the mountains. And in 1999, one of the critiques against the Air Force was that it was not ready to fight the war in the mountains. In Kargil, the Air Force was not prepared. It came in much later, and I say this to draw flack from my Air Force friends, but it was recognized that time that the Air Force was not ready.
I want a strong response to a very strong statement.
I tend to agree with that, because when we had initially worked out our QRs, etc., for our aircraft, there were certain aircraft that couldn't fire a weapon system beyond a certain altitude. Please. So we were not fully prepared. But yes, we were prepared enough to take on, and we did innovate some things to take on issue at Kargil. Otherwise, Kargil wouldn't have stopped when it stopped. I agree here with Nitin on the issue of the number of squadrons. Earlier on, we had weapon platforms which could carry only 1 ton of load, or 2 missiles, or a gun. Today, we've got platforms which got 10 plus launchers, whether you carry bombs, missiles, air-to-air missiles, air-to-ground missiles. So we need to really think, because we are never going to reach that figure of there are three figures as far as my knowledge goes, 39.5, then it went to 42, then someone produced 44, and in some document signed in 1974, it is even given as 55 squadrons if required. I've read it personally, but we can't afford. Cost factor comes in, we just cannot do it. Let us restrict ourselves. We've got multi-role aircraft, we've got multi-swing aircraft, dual swing aircraft in the air, to the numbers required also based on the nuclear factor which is going to be there. But we cannot afford, I don't think we can go beyond 30 squadrons with the kind of cost pricing that was talked of, 1,200 crores per aircraft. Sorry.
Let me take two more people before we end this round, because we're coming to the end of it.
Just to reinforce what some of the others said, we like to take it as an article of faith that we have this national interest that must guide our defense strategy and therefore our force structure, and that this national interest is overarching and immutable and unchangeable and so on. The fact is there's a higher interest than national interest, and that is तुम्हारे जेब में क्या है? Any study of British defense policy and the retreat of British power shows that they have progressively downscaled their national interests to match with their ability to pay. Whether it was the withdrawal from the Suez, from Southeast Asia, they have consistently, as a strategically educated country, redefined their strategic interest. Which is why I find this entire talk of a two-scale war, it's a joke. The one time that we have fought a one-front war with China, we have still not forgotten or recovered from. Today we are talking about a two-front war. I agree with General Mehta, the government has not imposed a two-front war philosophy on the Forge. The Forge has done it itself, and it has done it in order to, for obvious reasons, every forge negotiates for a larger share of the pie. So you define your task in larger terms and do it. The problem starts when you start believing your own, these parameters that you set for yourself. I think that if the government says, it has never said it, but if the government says that the military must be ready for a two-front war, all three chiefs should get up and go in a jatha to the thing and say, we are completely unready for a two-front war, and we never will be. Because China is a power that is growing at thrice our size, at thrice our pace. Where is this two-front war? How are we serious about
Are you
this?
calling for a change in doctrine, actually, Ajay? Are you calling for a change in
There
doctrine?
isn't a doctrine of a two-front war. This is a complete myth that has become a truth.
Can I just come in for a minute, half a minute? There is no doctrine because I think, like General Mehta said, and I think only once serving chief has articulated it. At least we don't know in public domain. If it's in the closed doors or it's in the air headquarters, army or navy headquarters, we don't know. But only General Deepak Kapoor once spoke about it flittingly at a seminar somewhere that in the nuclear overhang, if we have a two-front war, then are we ready for it or should we be ready for it, that kind of thing, if I'm not...
This is eliciting some exciting comments, so I'll let it go on for another 5 minutes.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say that it's not for the Indian government to decide whether they want to fight a one-front war or a two-front war. Unfortunately, the decision does not lie in their hands. My colleague of mine has just spoken about and given the example of UK. United Kingdom today, they have no threat. Secondly, they are tied to the apron strings of United States. They're part of NATO and security alliance. And therefore, they are matching their budgets with their force levels because they know that they are secure. Unfortunately, we do not have that kind of shall we say, thing to talk about. It is not Indian government to decide that, no, we will fight one-front war. As far as India is concerned, they don't want to fight any war.
But if Admiral Prakash gets into it, we might have a three-front war, right?
We don't want to fight a war. We don't want to fight a war. We all know that is the Indian culture, that is the Indian ethos. We basically want to be left alone in peace and with our sovereignty intact. That's all. But what we have to prepare for is what the adversary is likely to do to us. And I'll stop here.
On the other hand, if you read the blood telegram, Kissinger was ordered to go to China and tell them that it's okay for you to
Hey, this is a reality,
needle
guys.
India.
We can keep
Shaji,
talking
can I
about
just
it.
finish?
Sorry.
So I think it will be very short-sighted for us not just talk about it, but also prepare for it. No government is going to tell you do this or do that. I think the armed forces must be prepared, because if you go to war with one country, the other one will definitely take advantage. Why not? And their friendship is as deep as the sea and as high as the mountains and all that. You don't expect them not to do that. They don't even have to do anything. They just have to move a few formations for you to be absolutely sidetracked.
One-liner over here, one-liner, just one-liner.
Yeah, please.
Two-front deterrence at least is required. We may not fight a war. Two-front deterrence is at least required. That's what you got to consider.
Yeah,
and,
Janata.
May I? Sorry, sir. Go ahead.
No.
So I'm just saying that we have discussed this. What is the defense budget in terms of GDP? At least we talked about it. Hey, this greater share of pie and all that is perhaps, to some extent it may be true, but I think this is an overstated business. Armed forces, senior officers also are as nationalist and as rational as others are. It just seems to give an impression, that these guys are going to sleep, all they want is a greater share of the pie. Hey, incidentally, Barbara just quoted, it's around 1.48, you said. So it's, guys, that is not a big fear. We can argue whether you should prepare for a two-front war or not. I tend to agree with Admiral Arun Prakash that you can't wish it away.
There is a major difference between being prepared to handle a two-front war and structuring for a two-front war. Structuring means you create the forces and do the spending necessary for that. When it comes to the worst case scenario, we'll be prepared for simultaneous attacks from all our neighbors and from some outside also. We have no choice but to handle that. But is that likely? Is that what we should structure for? Is that what we can afford? That's the question.
But this, as we all said, these are semantics. To say be prepared, only force structure. Actually, when you say be prepared for two front, you have to have forces. You cannot just do exercise on the paper and move forces from one end to other end and then say you do it. The troops on mountain have to be trained for mountain and have to build on mountain. So I think we'll have to very seriously consider that whole country is growing and money on our own security is actually being spent left, right and center. If we really put it together, you'll find that armed forces are getting not even 1/10 of what they should be getting. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I said in my mind, it's something that has not been decided yet. This two-front issue. There's some very valid points on both sides, and it certainly calls for maybe a day-long seminar with much greater participation and some very serious logistical work to be done on this.